What I'd like to do is first go to Ecclesiastes and give you the layout of the book of Ecclesiastes. What's important is for you to see how the journey of Solomon is told in the very interesting diary of a man who finally comes to Pekeach. He comes from the blindness to clarity. He comes to the focus on what life is really about. And by the way, it's an interesting essay, but really most scholars would say it's from a time in Solomon's life where he got clarity. Can I just caution you? He lost it after that. It's easy for you to go through moments of intimacy spread out by long times of aloneness. Okay? And that's what a lot of people define as their Christian experience. It's kind of like, yeah, I walk with God. Back in 72, there was the 6 months, and I walked with God in 81. Had a really good stretch in 92, man. That was whoa, me and God, 92. But between their Christian life is this wandering of doing it my way, you know, the Frank Sinatra tune, and they're just out there trying to figure out life. And the problem with that is that's now come to be normal for a lot of Christians. They honestly believe that maturity is theological capability. And that's not true. By the way, theological capability, is that essential? Yes, but that's not maturity. Is obedience essential? Could you possibly have been in this class for the Torah and not conclude that obedience is like really important to God? Yes, but it's not maturity. Maturity is intimacy. That's when my repentance and my obedience, my commitment and my call isn't to a book, it's to a person. Isn't to an idea, it's to a relationship. Some of you are going to meet the love of your life in the next few years. That's prophetic. I'm going to lay it out there, okay? And I can say this every year, and I'm usually right. So here's the thing. When that happens, let's say Andrea meets the love of her life, and he sees this incredible girl. She's intelligent, she's sweet, she's got all these things going on in her, and he meets her, and he just falls deeply in love with her. It's probably her eyes. You know. At any rate, he's got great dreams for her. Now, the thing is, I know something about most of the girls here. You really want not only a guy who loves you, but a guy who makes you the focus of their love. You're not interested in a guy who really loves you on Tuesday, Thursday, and every other Saturday. But let's say they go off, they get married, and they have this wonderful, idyllic wedding, and then they go off for the perfect honeymoon. And then he goes back to work, and he sends her love texts, you know, but he doesn't really want to spend time with her. He works night and day, and he's just a workaholic, and when he comes home, he's dead tired, he drops in bed. How many of you think she's going to be unhappy? I mean, you know her, she's going to be unhappy, right? Then she's going to start complaining, then it's going to get really ugly. Here's the thing. He may be making a lot of money and sending her texts, but he's not giving her what she wants, which is time with him. And for most believers I know, they're giving God a lot of the things they want him to want, not what he asked for, which was a piece of their life, which is, I want time with you. I want to walk with you. There was a time in Solomon's life when he got smart. Most of it, he was wise and not smart. He walked through a whole time in his life where he went into a cave of darkness. I want to take you back to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and I want to lay out the book for you first. It's going to be a little bit mechanical. So, what there are 8 segments, and each of the 8 segments have an answer that he finds, okay? So I'm going to try to do this in an organized way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I always mess up. 8. Okay, 1. Like the Psalms, it's sometimes hard to see the way that the book is laid out. Some of it is grammar and language, some of it is the layout of the book. So I'm just going to bypass all the detail of that and just go right to the point so that you can lay it out in your Bible and really figure out first what this book is and then how to use it. I want to suggest to you that these 8 parts are like sermons. They're like sermonettes for Christianettes. They're like little tiny sermons that Solomon does. They're actually musings. A musing is is a wise man sitting down and giving a few proverbial statements. Sometimes they hang together, sometimes they don't, okay? These are 8 musings, and each time I want you to make each of these the problem stated. That's what all these boxes are. It's a problem that is stated. Let me give you the detail of where they are, and then we can go down and we can actually mark it out in our text, okay? The first one is 1:1 to 2:23. And after each one, there are conclusions that are drawn. So, 2:24 to 3:22 are first conclusions. So each one of these boxes will present a little musing followed by an insightful set of comments that link you back to the theme, okay? So I want to take a moment and I want you to see that when you're doing this book, do you all remember when we studied Job? What part of Job was God speaking? The last part, 28, yeah. And basically, until you get to the last part, what was the value of the early part of Job? Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, the young guy who really got it all wrong. What was the value of reading their chapters?
Give you a view of what they were thinking.
It tells you what lost people are thinking about something, but they're wrong. So you don't take a life verse from the beginning of Job because it's from a guy who got it wrong. How do I know? Because in chapters 28 and following, God says, yeah, you all got it wrong. And then he gives an answer. And the answer is, you don't get to know the answer. That's the answer. But the point is, there's a piece of the book where what it is people's thoughts, but it's not really God's compelling answer. All right, same thing here. You're going to read part of this book, and the problems that are stated, the musings, are the thoughts or the telling of Ecclesiastes, but it's the answers that lead you to the conclusion of where God is in intimacy. Okay, let's try one because I'm talking around it. It'll help if I do it. Go to the beginning and see that it says, this is the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What advantage does man have in all his work? That's what I'm saying, labor versus opus. What does he have? Which he does under the sun. I want you to underline 2 words, vanity, and I want you to underline the words under the sun. The point of the book is, what is the point of my life on earth? That's the point. And here's the underlying answer is, there isn't one. It's completely empty if you're looking at the earth to find the answer. Under the sun, you can't find the reason why you're under the sun. Why? Because it's beyond the sun. That's where the reason is. In other words, those who live their life here for the here and now do not understand what life is for. And at the end of it, they will never have what they came for. And here's the thing. They lived their life blocking away intimacy with God, trying to do it their way. And in eternity, hell is about, you didn't want me, so I will just withdraw my presence and leave you without me. That's what it essentially is. You didn't want me. And because you didn't want me, I'll give you what you want. Be careful what you ask God for. One of the greatest punishments of life can be getting exactly what you asked for. And here, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of the toils? There is none, he concludes, under the sun. I want to look under the sun and I want to ask the question. All right, so I tried a couple things, and what I love about this is he starts off and he says, I really want to try out some things and figure out if I can give you a little bit of the greatest of the problems of life and how I explored them from the wisest man ever. So from 4 to 7, he starts talking about what I'll call purposeless monotony. Listen to it. Those are the 2 words you want to write down. Purposeless monotony. I didn't tell you this, but this book in Hebrew is called Kohelet. Kohelet is like the word preacher, or in the ancient language, it was, Kahal was like a meeting or assembly. Kohelet was the speaker to the assembly. And it was the guy who thought he had something to say. Okay, that's really what it means. It's the guy who thought he had something to say. So here he says, listen to the tone of this. Now I'm obviously reading a translation and reading it in English, but you can still pick it up. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Sun rises, sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again, blowing toward the south, then toward the north. The wind continues swirling along, and its circular courses the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full, to the place where the rivers flow, and there they flow again. Can you hear the sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset? It's like, tomorrow we're going to do it all again. Can you feel that? Purposeless monotony. Because under the sun, when I try to define my life and I don't know what it's for, I don't find it by doing. The opus is not determined out of the labor by simply doing more labor. It's not the amount you get done. By the way, in the technological world, people believe that if I can do more, faster, that's better. But there are workplaces filled with people that can produce more than they've ever produced in a daytime, and they are just as empty as the generations that went before them. We know that there are many people out there who believe if he who dies with the most toys wins. But my favorite bumper sticker is he who dies with the most toys still dies. And then you don't get your toys. So if you made your whole life about accumulating toys, they're all taken from you. There are no U-Hauls behind hearses. Nobody takes anything with them except for the clothes they decide to put on you. Now, purposeless monotony is followed by unfulfilled busyness, which is in 8 to 11. Listen to it. It says, all things are wearisome. Man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing. The ear is filled with hearing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which will be. This is the que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. It just goes on and on and on. Verse 10, is there anything one might say? See, this is new. It existed already for ages. Verse 11 says there's no remembrance of earlier things. I want you, if you don't know this, if it's not real to you, write it next to verse 11. Your great-grandchildren will not know your name. They won't. Your great-great-grandchildren, surely. Can you tell me your great-great-grandfather's middle name? So here's the thing. We're not going to get remembered. And if you make your life about that, it's not about that. It's not. So the bottom line is, isn't this an upbeat talk? Man, yes it is. And here's the reason why. I'm not telling you there isn't meaning to life. I'm telling you can't discover it by getting busy. And I'm telling you can't discover it by unfulfilled busyness. You can make your life as busy as you want, and most people are because they're running from the ultimate questions they cannot answer. Now, you get to verses 12 to 11. We're still inside of him stating a promise. And let's see if we can pick up what he did. He said, I the Kohelet, I have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. I set my mind to seek and explore, verse 13, concerning all that has been done under heaven. He says, I set my mind to know as much as I could about earthly, physical things. This is not metaphysical. It's not the stars. It's not the angelic world. It's the here and now, the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of life. He says, here's what I concluded. It's a grievous task which God has given the sons of men to be afflicted with. I figured out that, wow, I have a personal commitment to search. That's what verses 12 and 13 are. A personal commitment to search. I set out on a journey. I know what I'm trying to find out. And here's what I found out. Man, there's a lot of work out there. And it just doesn't seem to end. And then he goes on and he says, now look, I made some personal observations in verses 14 and 15. Look at the observations. He said, I've seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. I would tell you this. Under the sun, as an end in itself, no physical labor ever done on this planet will really matter that much. Now, if done for God, it matters in that way. But this old building's just a building. It's going to fry like everything else. So when you see it, it says, what is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Now, you haven't been doing a lot of proverbial sayings, but we've done a few. What's he saying in verse 15? What's the gist of the whole point?
It's already messed up, we can't seem to fix it.
Yeah, I can't fix what's broke. That's the bottom line. I'm looking at life and I'm going, wow, a lot of stuff is crooked and I can't make it straight. Now, you can spend your life on this observation or you can just read him and believe what God said. Okay? But here's the thing. There are people out there in relief organizations who honestly believe if they bring enough relief to people, it will suddenly make sin go away. It won't. People will steal, and the more money you bring and the more prosperity you bring, the more they'll steal. I'm not telling you don't help them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying as an end in itself, you will be broken by the Peace Corps. You'll be broken by it. Because you will find that people will make the argument in today's society that people weren't born to be evil. And I disagree. I never taught any of my 3 children to lie. They all did it on their own. I'm not saying that they were born to do massive, dark evil. I'm saying they were born broken. And I can't fix people. I know God can, but I can't. And Solomon's not looking from God's perspective. He's looking from his. Now, if I've got some personal observations, look at the experiments he does. Experiment number 1 is verses 16 to 18. Experiment number 1 is I'm going to search for meaning in practical knowledge. I am going to hit the books. He says, I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge, and I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realize that this also is striving after the wind, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and in increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. He said, I decided I was going to be the internet. I was going to be Mr. Google, Mrs. Google. And I'm going to know all that's going on in the world. So I am going, because I need to know. How do I know? CNN told me I need to know, and I need to know first. So I'm going to spend my time, and I'm going to know every conflict in the world, and every people group, and everything about everything. And I'm going to be invited to dinner parties and be this bubbly amounts of information that knows, because I have watched everything, and I'm into everything. And here's what I realized. I just feel worse. This is the word for the internet generation. We know every conflict on earth, and we walk around feeling victimed and powerless because we know a lot more than we can do anything about, so we just feel worse. This is the crabby Facebook people. Okay? He says, okay, I went out there, I got all this knowledge, now I really feel worse. Now, that's not his only experiment. The second one was, then I decided I'd take another approach on life, and 2:1-3 is the second approach. He said, I thought I would try pleasure. I'll do a little Epicurean dip here and see how this goes for me. So 2:1-3 says, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure, so enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. By the way, this is the life verse of many a college student today. You know, I'll go to school, my parents think I'm getting an education, what I'm getting is a hangover. And you think I'm kidding? I'll drive you onto any campus and we'll find them. People sitting in the library that are supposed to be reading, what they're actually doing is they're passed out over top of a book. And then he says in verse 3, I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine. There he goes. While my mind was guiding me wisely in how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under the heavens a few years of their lives. I figured you only go around once, so I'm going to, tie one on and go see how that helps me walk. I'm going to try a few things and, push my body, do a couple things, and you could also take out of this that he got some pleasure probably out of, lifting some weights and going down to the gym. It wasn't all about one thing. It was about many things. He said, I want to experience what it feels like to feel good. I want to tell you the single most devastating thing I've seen in Christian young people in the last decade. Single most devastating are the ones who thought God's will is found in my pleasure. Do you know where it usually shows up? Relationships. That God's not against it if it makes me feel so good about me. Do not define God's direction by your feelings. Don't do it. Because sometimes, what Laura was saying earlier is God's going to tell you to get in the aircraft and throw up. What he's going to tell you to do is going to be the opposite of feel good and easy. And he's not doing it to test you, go like, oh, I want to mess with you. That's not it. It's the good feeling is not relevant to the direction. The direction is, stand where I tell you to stand. I'm the director of this movie. I know where I need you to be. Okay? Now, here's the reality. The next one, the third experiment. So he's tried practical knowledge. He's tried pleasure. The next one is in 4 to 11. This is the search for meaning in accomplishments. This is what so many people you drive by as you go through the suburbs are doing. Verse 4, he says, I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself, planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. I possessed flocks and herds larger than any who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasures of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and prostitutes. It's female singers, and for the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. I want you to stop by. I want you to look at something. Do you see in verse 4 the words, for myself? Underline that. It's twice, for myself. Then at the end of verse 4, for myself. In verse 5, for myself. Did you see it in verse 6? For myself. In verse 8, for myself, twice, for myself. And what you see is a guy who went out and said, I'm going to do this, it's going to be for me. And this was about trying to figure out how I can be affirmed by stepping back and going, I have made fire. I have built vineyard. Look at what I have done. I have the biggest car on the block, the nicest kitchen ever. Americans are obsessed with big kitchens and then they don't cook in them. They go out. We are obsessed with building houses that have rooms we don't go in. And yet it's somehow affirming to us, is it not? So here's the thing. He walks around and then he makes some personal observation. Let's see if we can pick up some personal observations. I got to move quickly. Drop down to verse 12. Verse 11 says, I considered all my activities my hands had done, labors which I had exerted. Can I just tell you that the I's in verse 11, when he says, I did them, when you're a king and you plant a vineyard, it means you say, you guys plant that vineyard. So when he says, I did it, it didn't include any shovels, calluses, or any dirt. Okay? It's him sitting in a chair saying, move that tree, will you? The 40 slobs that are down there moving the tree, they don't get the accomplishment. It's his tree, it's his land, he's the king. So he looks back on all that I have done, meaning all the people I told to do it. So I return to consider wisdom, verse 12, madness and folly, for what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. He says, what I saw was they became comparatives in my mind. He says, really, okay, so I built all this. Then I'm going to die, so really what's the point? He goes through this kind of melancholy thing. And he says, my knowledge won't have a lasting effect on the world around me. Verses 12 and 13, what do they really say? You will never accomplish anything that in and of itself means anything in eternity here. Why? Because stuff here isn't eternal. You just won't. So build it. But the bottom line is after you build it, it's going to get destroyed. I'm always amazed if you've ever had the chance to go to places. I went to a place in North Carolina that used to be a movie studio, and it fell into disrepair, and they left it, and it became kind of this wilderness area. And these great buildings now have trees growing up through them and pushing the roofs off the buildings. In just 2 decades, you drive in there, and you see that what used to be so shaped by humanity and carpenters and workers is now becoming nature again. After you're gone, stuff doesn't last. Let me go past that. Verses 14 and 15. Both the wise and foolish, they end with the same issues. He says in verse 14, the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. He says, here's the thing. One guy walks around and he's really aware of what's going on because he's wise. The other one's an absolute idiot. They both die. That's what he says. They both die. In verse 15, then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why have I become extremely wise? So I said to myself, this is empty. What's the point? I'm going to spend my life and become this professor who knows all these things, and then I'm going to die, and it's all going to be pretty much gone. So what's the point of that? So he says, because the wise and foolish end their life with the same issues, he says they're going to meet the same end. Look at verse 16. There's no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten. Just underline all will be forgotten. That's the sense of it. I'm going to write books that, I'm going to work really hard, spend hours and hours and hours, and for a while people will read them until they don't, and then they're on the discount rack, and then nobody remembers who that Randy whatever guy was. And that's just the way it is. So when you're looking at your life and you're going, but I have such a hunger to accomplish in my field, go all the way to the top of it. It's only going to last until you're dead, and then in 2 generations they won't know your name, and really it won't matter. You can't even tell me the name of all the presidents of the United States. What is the likelihood you're going to be able to tell me all the little people that served them? You don't know that the guy who became Secretary of Defense back in 1913 was good old what's his name? I mean, really, we don't know. They were the pinnacle of the craft of their time, and we don't know who they are. It just really says a lot. Verse 17 says, when life is about what I've done, it's bitter and hard. Look at verse 17. I underlined in my Bible, so I hated life. For the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, and because everything is futility, it's empty, striving after the wind. I got to the place where I was like, wow, I've thrown so many years at this. It's not fun. It doesn't mean anything. It's not going to last. Verse 18, I hated all the fruit of my labor. When I look at 18 to 23, he says, as I looked at my accomplishments, they lost their luster. I got that nice new car, and then the knob fell off, and somebody scratched it in Publix with a shopping cart. And then I was like, now I got to go get new brakes. And it wasn't cool anymore. The hottest chariot was now not so hot. I got the coolest computer that the day I unboxed it was already becoming, the old computer because somebody else was blowing past it with the newest technology. The world is changing, and you're a part of it. And if you make your life about the things that you build, here's what I want you to know. Go down to verse 24. There's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. I want you to see something. Drop down to the conclusions section, because the conclusions say the following. Number 1, see your labors as God's gift. There is nothing better than a man to tell himself that his labor is good. Now look at the end of the sentence. This also I have seen, it is from the hand of God. This is the first time God gets mentioned. You know why? Because in the conclusion for the first set of problems, the conclusion is this: if I don't see it as God's gift to me to have life, then life becomes meaningless. We are living in a world that is trying to find meaning from meaninglessness. Increasingly in the educational societies that you're seeing out there, they're trying to create a reason. The other thing I think is that we have to understand that God has a purpose for our life and work. And what I think he's trying to say is that I have to recognize God has a timing for all things. Look what he says. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him, God? In other words, you don't really ever enjoy anything if you don't know what it was for. And without him, you won't know what it's for. Are these good verses for college students? I mean, can you not walk onto any campus and see how this works? And here's the thing, he says in verse 26, for to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting so that he might give to the one who is good in God's sight. Here's what he says. God has a relationship with some people. He doesn't have a relationship with most people, and most people are working really hard to make a better society so God's people can use it. I don't think when the Greeks were building a language base that they knew that their language was not going to be the words of the philosophers of the West that were going to make the difference. They were going to be the words of the wings of the gospel. I don't think when Rome built worldwide networks of roads, they understood that that wasn't going to be just about transporting troops. It was going to be about transporting missionaries in sandals that are going to make it and the gospel is going to move. I think in the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son because God knew exactly what He wanted done by great men who didn't know Him so that men who did could use the stuff. I think that's the point. So you step back and you go, wow, there's a good conclusion. And what I want you to see is the beginning of this is without God, I don't have anything. But if I understand God, I understand the purpose of my labor. And when I understand the purpose of my labor, it's no longer meaningless and it's no longer heavy. Now I have a reason. Now what's our theme from 1 Kings 6? Our theme is, it's not just about a list of obedient things. It's not just about repentance. Those are important. It's not about just guarding the truth. It's about doing it with Him. Because if I don't do it with Him, none of it means squat.